we set up the night rendering very similarly to other perspectives, but they start off just as much as any other drawing in this particular viewpoint. But it's at some point in the workflow where you have to stop and take and understand that you're at a fork in the road, because you don't want to complete a perspective or an elevation. If you're going to do a night view, you don't want to take this all the way through with all the shade and all the shadow as you would for a day rendering. So at some point you have to decide, is this going to be a night view or is this going to be a day view? It's that fork in the road that you don't add certain things to things. What's different about this view than some of the other views we've looked at or we've done? What's different? What's missing or what's different there? This is the participatory part. Yes, the color is missing. Good. Okay. There's only one visible line weight. There's no shadows. And there's no dark windows. Okay? During in a daytime setting or daytime rendering, we tend to shade the windows, right? Because it's darker inside than it is outside in the daytime. We tend to cast shadows from awnings and cornices and surfaces. So if you have the idea that you want to show nighttime view, you don't want to put any of that in there. So you have to stop during your workflow and say, all right, I'm thinking about this as potentially a night view. And so therefore it has a few things missing from it. Why would we not include all of that stuff based on that complete version? What does that do for us? Well, yes, I know. If you say nothing, I'll just start speaking. What does that do for us? What is, by changing our workflow there, what does that do for us? Excellent. Okay. It allows us the freedom to show the illusion of light casting from the windows as opposed to light casting on the surfaces. The light is coming out. Therefore, the workflow is such that, and the rendering workflow is such that you have to leave negative space around things that emanate or cast light. You have to leave windows unfilled to show the illusion of light coming out. And you have to then decide where that light is coming from and what effect it has on the adjoining surfaces. Okay? It's a different mentality than the color rendering process or workflow that we've done before. Okay? Because some things are missing and some steps are changed. It's a fork in the road. If I'm going to do a night rendering, I have to stop at a certain point and do this, and this. If I'm doing a daytime rendering, I add significant amounts of line weight, cast shadow, and so forth. But all of that's missing because we need to render the presence of light as well as the absence of light. Rendering the presence of light and the absence of light. The brightest surfaces are around light fixtures. We leave them white. Okay, this can be easy to forget, but we leave that surface white. We leave some white around that particular light fixture. We render up to it, but we leave the brightest portions white. Okay, now, previous years, light fixtures were incandescent. They were made with tungsten. They tended to create yellow light. Street lights used to be either magnesium or sodium vapor. Sodium vapors were the worst because they were all yellow, and it made you look like you had jaundice or something. They were the worst street lights ever. Magnesium vapor was typically a blue to green light, and that's still the case. Now that we're switching over to LED, the LEDs are giving us more flexibility in controlling the color temperature of those lights. And LEDs, of course, are available everywhere, Christmas lights and the like. So they do tend to appear very, very brilliant in photography and otherwise. What other things are creating or emanating light in this view? Okay, so the impression of red LEDs coming from the bicycle, or potentially red LEDs from these chain lights. What about this right here? What's that doing? What might that start to create the impression? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It could be a neon sign, or it could be a bright, yeah, noticeable. So the sign is left white, but there's definitely a color being cast from the sign, and notice the presence of the color on the surfaces. So this is a different workflow in terms of color blending and color layering. You've been practicing that all semester, but this is where the rubber really meets the road when it comes to color blending and color layering. Soft washes of marker and layers of color pencil. Okay, blended together. What about the shade and shadow? What are we using for shade and shadow in this view? We tend to use the purples here because they are the color complement of all the yellows. The yellows give us the presence of light and the warmth of light, and then we use the color complement, the purples, which are opposite of the color wheel. Blueberry, pinks, purples, violets in the color sets, layered together with grays and blueberry, do a very, very good job in terms of establishing this rendering view. In the sky, lots of blues, okay, from the color set. Typically cross-hatched or layered together. That's a typical Jim Leggett technique, is to have a very deep sky with 3 or 4 colors blended together and then having that cast down to the horizon line. Gives that impression of light pollution, right? Because it's lighter at the horizon line and darker as you go up. So it starts to emanate, give it an impression of that. That view right there would work for that moment of twilight. Just after the sun goes down, the sky turns blue, doesn't it? Perfect cobalt purple blue, and then black. But for those moments just after the sun goes down, there's that moment of that beautiful purple blue sky, and that is the impression that we're after. This could also work for sunrise, but not that many people out at sunrise. But at any rate, that's a view that can very much talk about a very, very specific time of day. We can add to this view. Jim Leggett has a workflow that shows how you take this view into Photoshop, put a layer over it, and then you subtract things from it to give it even more punch. And I'll show you, I can show you quickly in Photoshop how the steps for that as well. Okay? Okay. 45 degrees and 20 degrees. It also is slightly pressure sensitive, so we get a little bit of change in line weight based on the pressure. Maybe there's a curb, either a bus lane or perhaps a bike lane. Some curvature around the trunk. And we will need to decide what kind of lighting effect this person exists in, or if they are in fact lit by their phone or otherwise. So these will all be factors in terms of how we will approach the lighting at the end of the drawing. Center lane.
is just by barely touching the paper, we can get thin versus thick line weights with the sign pen. Now I'll work into the middle ground. We've got another person over here. Essentially bookending the view. Be loose, be free. This is a night view, so the demand for detail is not as severe or as much as we have for a lot of other views. We'll work now into this island. We've got a tree and grasses. So you can see my tree technique there that you're familiar with. And I can almost drag the pen like a brush. Again, to vary the line weights and to establish a fluid character. So this boundary here will contain that dark color. Now, in a back and forth pattern, back and forth. We'll allow that blueberry now to go into the background trees. And around, this is a little tough now. Back and forth. We need to leave some negative space for the leaves. Not a lot, but some. So your greens can exist in there. But just leave some negative space. So you can take this now around the light source, around that light source, not over it, around it, down to the cornice line, back up to the bounding box, and so forth. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Just like cutting a log. Slight overlap, slight overlap. Some negative space. What if I mess up? Don't worry. AB markers tend to displace each other, so you'll be fine. Always layer in. We'll layer in the greens over that purple, and it will be fine. So this works with blueberry. It also works with Dutch blue. I've tried it with gray, but I don't like it with gray, but this could work with a cool gray as well. But I've tried it before and I didn't care for it. So that gives us a dark wash for that whole sky. I'm not going to do any foreground yet. We need to render the present light in that foreground. We tend to use light browns for day renderings. You can use your darker browns now for buildings. Things like craft brown, desert tan. To layer more color on them. It will be a base color. We will layer more onto it as we render the presence of light on these different surfaces. Not a lot of stuff down here, but we do need some architectural color in the upper story. But nothing in the lower register. If you have a favored awning color, that can work for the umbrellas and the awning. There's a branding color or something like that that'll be noticeable. I'm going to tend towards the darker greens, so my slate green and emerald green. In this case, apple green, slate green. I'm rotating the barrel as I work. Rotating the barrel, see how it blends with the blueberry and displaces it. This is apple green. Apple green in my broadleaf. And in grasses. Apple green works, grass green also works. The two colors are almost identical. So I'm just texturing that. We'll work with and against the purple. Works with the negative space we left, as well as some of that purple. Tree line in the background starts to get a little bit of green. This is a suburban context, so lots of woodlot and tree lots around it. Rotating the barrel as I work, I give the impression of broadleaf trees in the foreground. All those techniques we learned in the first few weeks coming through now. The rotation of the barrel as you work. I'm tending on the darker side of my green set. So this is apple green, emerald green, and slate green. Darker as I go up. Daytime rendering, we go darker as we go down. The opposite is true with a nighttime rendering. Because the street level is where the brightest light is. So in a night rendering, the trees get darker as we go up, as opposed to darker as we go down. A lot of reverse logic in the night rendering method that really affects the work, that steps in the work. Emerald green now. Using the toe of the marker, I'm going to, this is a Deegism. I'm just going to do a series of vertical lines for the background tree line with the toe of the marker. Just kind of finishes out the background and continue the broadleaf technique. Leaving a little bit of negative space in there because I want the presence of light or the play of light to play up into the trees. Not worried about trunk yet, that'll come in together with blueberry and gray. But that's a good play of sort of dark portions of a tree. The darker it gets as it gets closer to the sky. You can see in the example here that notion of that play of light that a tree is darker. Got a pink, and I'm going to start using that pink now to start to think about neon or banner and begin to populate some of the scale figures. Scale figures that might be indoors, scale figures outdoors. The pink starts to give the impression of several scale figures in a busy storefront. Things which we have not seen for over a year. Kind of like that feeling where you're watching a show and you ask yourself, why is that? Next, I've got some goldenrod. I'll start adding some yellow to windows, giving the impression of warm light in the interior. See how it plays with the pink. Leave a little bit of white in there. And then I will start to touch the tops of the grasses with yellow. I'll start to touch portions of the trees with yellow. And I will start to, with a careful arc here, talk about the play of light onto this ground, like so. And start thinking about the play of light coming from the building onto perhaps wet pavement. Play of light on wet pavement. This is why car commercials always spray the driveway and the road to show the car barrel over. Right? Wet pavement always looks better in foot photography than dry pavement. It's that play of yellow and white that will start to give the impression of interior light, interior activity, and then the play of light onto the pavement. Yes, chances are it'll be reflecting light from the street. This is a canary yellow. It's kind of a bolder lemon yellow, and it really starts to play against goldenrod. It's a very bold yellow, very dangerous yellow. But I love danger. Now we can get into the grays. I'll take my cool gray 3. I want to decide on an edge that the surface might be extracting from. Choices to be made. In a 2-point perspective like this, we can accentuate the direction of the roadway, or we can start to show some streaking coming from our primary subject. So it's a choice to be made. I'm going to pick the horizon line as a point of origin and streak out, pull marker color from that. Leave that alone, and I'll pose that with directional streaking. That again gives us the impression of wet pavement. I'm going after the impression of wet pavement. So I'll show streaking coming from the horizon line, and streaking, this is barely touching the paper, reinforcing the direction of the roadway. Sometimes I'll do one of these. This is where I'm rotating the barrel and marbling it, marbling it, marbling it. Again, reinforcing that impression of wet paper. Gray 3 also starts to add now to figures, cars, parking. It starts to fill in those other areas, that in between. See that in between there? This is the gray 3. You can layer it on top of other colors and it will start to darken it softly and gradually. So you can keep up with it. People, interior, see how it works against that pink? We'll start attacking the car. The car is going to cast a shadow for sure. Flowers, going to cast a shadow. Starting to get into some of this background here. The gray starts to fill in some of the potentially darker areas. The tree, our commuter, street lamp, some of the more unexplained areas start to be filled in with the gray. So that gray just kind of dances all over the place and starts to define that middle area between dark and light. I do want to clean that off though, because it has picked up a significant amount of green. So do clean off that tip. When the grays pick up green, they can continue to transfer that green into the future. This is now the 6th gray. I'm just going to reinforce the gray areas now, see what that does in terms of depth. Shadow on this pedestrian, on that car. The car interior, if it's not occupied and running, will typically be dark. Except in movies, right? Movies and TV shows, cars always have lights on, right? Yeah. It's just so we can see the characters. It's totally a filmmaking technique. You can cast shadow from the car onto the pavement now. Sort of streaking and marbling. I'll reinforce the pedestrian crossing, which we call zebra crossing. Most of our commuter here is probably in darkness, but I want to leave some light because I want their phone to be lighting them up. So an impression of the light from the phone, and then a cast shadow from our commuter onto the pavement, because we are reinforcing this notion of light coming from above. 6 gray works with 3 gray to reinforce contouring, curvature, the trunk of that tree, the curvature, roundedness of our lamp post. Using my drawing edge, I'm taking my finger and I'm running down the edge here. Fun trick. If you have a drafting board, sketchbook, or drawing board, just grab the edge of it with your pinky and you can pull a straight line. Old trick of taking your pinky and riding the edge of that surface. Works in your sketchbook too. Students in Chicago, Chicago filter, how'd you do that? How'd you get that straight line? Take your pinky and just drag it along one side of the sketchbook. Gray will find its way into the trees. Again, reinforcing, working with blueberry to give a very dark top to these trees. A triad of grays and greens and purples. Tops of the trees are the darkest part. Bottoms of the trees are the lightest part. Okay, take your colored pencil palette now, divide it in two, warm versus cool. Create two piles. It'll be a two-stage process by which we render the presence of light with the warm colors and then back that up with the presence of shadow with the cooler colors. So just grab a selection based on what you see there and divide them in two. Pinks, peaches, yellows, oranges, balanced with blues, purples, gray and black. Some browns too. And reinforce material colors with some black. But this is a good point just to divide your setup in two between warm color and cool color. Let's start with some neon. So hot pink, emanating from a sign, casting onto a surface, onto the awning, onto some people, onto the grass, onto the pavement. Hot, hot neon. Neon is a bit of a misnomer for that category of signs because each gas burns with a different color, right? Red is associated with neon. Those are the other noble gases, argon, xenon, create the different colors, right? But they all get grouped together under neon signs. There's some great neon work happening at the Glass Center, the Glick Center for Glass here on campus. The visiting glass artists have been doing some really interesting work with neon, argon, and the like. Oranges also start getting some really hot, warm things happening. An impression of activity indoors, layered on top of the gray. Around our outdoor dining area, people having fun, whatever that is. Just really warm up that lower register. Maybe an orange sign over here, emanating, casting light onto the underbelly, onto the car. Gold and yellow. Again, emanating from interiors, warm light, and then casting onto wet pavement. Softening out. So hard pressure at the beginning, softening pressure as I pull out. Street light. Soft pressure around the street light, soft pressure as it casts onto the wet pavement. Casting onto the grasses, casting onto the side of our pedestrian. Underbelly or understory of trees. A little bit of yellow down here because that's the part of the tree that's catching all the light. Maybe there's light casting onto our commuter from their phone. Maybe there's cast of light onto the underbelly of each cornice. And we'll balance that now with brick color. So now I can balance that with darker brick color. Disappearing as it gets closer to the light source. Fills in some gaps. Portion of the building that's not receiving that much light. Let's give that impression of brick we have in other situations, other classes, previous classes. Darker at top, fading into the neon at the bottom. Darker browns, filling in gaps. Clarifying some awning colors, storefront colors. Leave some negative space for the presence of light. Darker browns, the brick distance. Darker up top, lighter as we go down to the bottom. And this is a bar in the distance. Or some cooperation here. I'll add a little more color to the tops of the umbrellas. Leave the light below. A little bit of green texture in my grasses and broadleaf. A little bit of dark green at the tops of the trees. Just blend all those colors together. This is a radius relationship, so these are strokes that are referencing this confluence here of the primary branch. It's like a radius point. Leaving some negative space there, just again for that play of light. Background trees, a little bit of green. That wash of color pencil just fills in gaps and causes harmony amongst the marker stroke. maybe specific car colors that may involve gray or red. Cars don't come in that many colors anymore, so I have to be judicious about that, but there are just a little flash of blue or a little flash of red can go a long way. It's one of my favorite colors in the set, Rouge Tuscan or Tuscan Red. It's a deep maroon representing the common color found in the Roman uniform, Roman centurion uniform, very common color across the Roman world, but it represents maroon in our world, very common color among sports teams, Central Michigan, USC, Washington football team. But a good color for the set. Darker grays and blacks can come into play now because they help define textures in the night setting and add additional reinforcement or detailing where the line work doesn't. Maybe I want a little more definition of this door. I can have more confidence with that with this colored pencil than I perhaps would with a sign pen. Things like that. Maybe there's more to this cornice line than the pen could do. The black colored pencil gives that opportunity. Grasses, wonderful textures. Grays can work, start to soften this foreground now. This is the five finger grip. So I'm using the side of the side of the lead. Sorry, thanks. So this is the five finger grip. I'm getting the side of the barrel and I'm softening. Thank you. And I'm darkening the pavement. Darkening my pedestrians. They're cast shadow. This is a light source, so they are casting onto the ground, filling in gaps. This dark gray does a lot of good work for me. This is dark gray 70%. Darkening tree trunk. Much of this tree is in shadow. There is a light, we assume, above our view, differentiating between our pedestrian, the tree trunk, a little bit of background here, a little bit of shadow below, a little bit of pavement below. Now I'll flip it over. And I'm going to work from the top down with some depth. Purples and blues. And those can be hatched together. So I work from that top edge, and I can now diagonally lay in a wash of colored pencil. around my light source and into the trees. Sorry? This is a true blue. This is a true blue, yeah. Layer it directly into the tree. Don't touch the buildings per se. You probably want to leave those alone. This is a lilac. It's a light lavender. That'll work with the blue and the blueberry. As my mother calls it, lilac.
Do you rotate your pencil when you do that, or do you like the flat edge?
Yeah, I don't mind the flat edge at all. I can also use the 5-finger and really grab the side of the pencil using that 5-finger method. This is pure violet. Violet in the set. That's another darker purple now. I can concentrate some darker purple in the upper register. And then layer violet now into my darker areas. Layer violet into the tops of my buildings. Tops of the brick like this. The violet works very well for that. Black grape is another great pencil if that's in your set. Black grape is a great addition to the set. Notice how it layers on top of the brick to give that impression of darkness up there. Only the cornice is reflecting light from the street. This combination of purple with the browns, true color complement, adds darkness to almost anything. Greens, browns, as well as all the other earth tones we have. I'll add violet. It works really well with grays. Tremendously valuable part of the set. I can put ghost people inside. I can give the impression of people indoors against folks out of doors. People seated at tables in that busy restaurant. Somebody peeking out the window to the upper floor. People inside the car. Looking for that darkness. This is violet. Black grape works also, but I'm just going to add violet now to a lot of these areas that are in shade. Five-finger method again. A little bit of purple on that pavement. I'm assuming it's wet pavement, so it is reflecting moonlight, it's reflecting street lights. And where it really counts is on the material palette of the building itself. as the building gets darker as it goes up. There are gaps. This violet purple really fills them in too. Anything you want darker, you just add some purple to it at this point. But any gaps at all, you can add purple to it and fill them in.
Adjusted the perspective. Adjusted the perspective there. I'm going to create a new layer. I'll just call it fog. And on that I will select a foreground and background color. Foreground color in a deep blue or deep purple. Background color, maybe a darker gray. And I'm just going to put that as either as a paint bucket or as a gradient. So a gradient tool here will do a transition from foreground to background color. I'll cast that over the entire view like so. There are of course different types of gradients. There's linear, there's conical, there's circular, different gradients that you can use. But this will allow you to put that'll cast it over the entire view here. I then do a right mouse click on the layer itself. I go to blending options. I select under blend mode. I change it from normal to multiply. Change it from normal to multiply. Increase the effect of like basically layering something on top of the drawing itself. I then can lower the opacity, and we can see that this is the equivalent of like layering a blue-gray film over the drawing. Now, blending mode normal, it'll take pixels, colored pixels, and cover your drawing. Blending mode multiply, it will add to the color of your drawing. There's a difference. It's the equivalent. It's like layering a transparent film over the drawing as opposed to covering those pixels. Okay, so blend mode multiply makes a huge difference when it comes to adding color to something as opposed to covering color. Understand the difference there? Okay, so this now, I've got it at like 40%, something of that nature. All right, now I will, with that fog layer as the active layer, I'll grab the eraser and I'll make it a brush. And you can use any brush type that you want. If you've got brushes loaded, or if you have custom brushes downloaded or things like that, these are interesting places to use that. I'm going to use fairly big brushes though. And I can change the flow and the smoothing and all those different options here, as well as the opacity of the eraser now. So I'm erasing things away. There. Size, brush type, opacity, flow, smoothing. And what I do then is I essentially start carving away from that layer. I just carve away this fog layer is what I'm doing. I'm going to go with a fairly big brush though, and I can change. There's tons of brushes in here, and maybe change the flow of it, and maybe soften the opacity of this eraser. Maybe do a little bit of smoothing as well. So that each time I touch this eraser now, it's carving away. So maybe there's some light over here in a parking lot. Maybe there's a lot of light in our cafe area. Directly underneath the awning. So by softening it, we get a little more bit of an effect there. You could mask out a selected area, get your pictures with, start away. There's a few things here, but what I might do, to your point, Ron, I will probably do an elliptical thing here and carve just within that area for a harder edge. Remember what I'm doing. Extra large brush. And it will carve within that harder edge. Smaller. And so you can have a lot of control here just in terms of this very soft carving away of the lighter areas that you want to accentuate. It's also very easy to overdo. You want to be careful. So here's that person's phone, lighting them up, and then to your point, I will probably very softly erase away just a portion of this. So I might change the flow or the opacity of this eraser here, but those are all variables that we can change in the upper register of the view. Make a super large brush and just carefully touch it like that. What do you think? There's a lot of value. It's powerful. So based on everything that's in front of you, right? Based on everything that's in front of you, these are additional effects that you can layer on top of what you just did. Really, really drive that ambience home. This may warrant a textured brush. There are leafy textures, there are speckled textures. They're all under these brushes menus, and you can really get into a lot of fun texture. And just starting to carve away or inch away at some of those portions of the trees. Punch out that middle ground. I think that's enough. You gotta know when to stop. Okay. Obviously, that works for computer renderings too, right? Right. So if you've got a thing set up with all your entourage and things like that, you just essentially put a mask on it, use the blending multiply, and then you can carve away those spots. The technique works the same for computer rendering. Okay. Let's not do another drawing. Bring this one back, and we'll do it next week. Okay. Approaching the end of the class. Thank you for everything.